Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre. Hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes, even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem. And boy, can you.
Hi.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
Beloved co-host.
Good afternoon.
Good day.
So, just a note about the weather today.
Do it.
It's overcast
It's
and
gray. Yeah.
Which is a perfect day for any horror-related activities.
It is. It is. It's a perfect day for two of my favorite things, horror and naps.
Yeah. Naptivities.
Yeah, exactly.
If you can have a nightmare.
Ideally, you're nightmaring your way through the afternoon.
Oh my gosh.
It's
wow.
just perfect day. Heart rate elevated, dead grandma telling you things from a swamp.
Wow.
Listen, it gets specific.
Yeah, it sure does. Another perfect thing to do today is to read.
Yes. I love to read on a gloomy day. I do. Like reading at the beach is not easy. You get that glare. It's really hot.
You just need an umbrella for sure.
I am such a vampire. I just don't like going outside. But a gray day is a great day to read. It really is. It's just something about it. And again, naps. Why not pass out with a book on your chest?
Why not?
Yeah.
And then a cat.
Yeah. You definitely wake up with a cat next to you. That's been my experience.
So this
Covered
is
in
going to
cats.
be our fourth and final Stephen King deep dive.
Absolutely. As we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary of meeting each other in a dark alley under the city and starting this podcast, we are going to wrap up our year-long journey into the King himself.
Yeah. We thought that we would, wrap this up with the final decade
4 parts.
plus of his
Hopefully not.
writing.
I mean,
No, this last.
yeah, the most recent one. But
That brings us up to present.
I'm looking forward to a 120-year-old Stephen King releasing 3 books a year. It's going to be amazing.
Well, he's definitely slowed down, if you can believe it.
I mean, it doesn't feel like it.
No, it doesn't. But, he is really releasing like a major novel a year now. He's still writing short stories that are released.
Yeah.
And, but there's no drought of ideas.
Honestly, a slow couple of years for Stephen King is like another writer's entire,
It just means what you're getting is
bibliography.
going to be even better, in
Yeah.
my opinion. And I will argue that what this sort of decade plus that we're going to talk about from 2011 to present,
Awesome.
actually future, because towards the end I want to talk about what's coming, because it does tie into what's already been written.
Absolutely. I think I know what you're talking about, and I'm looking forward to that too.
So this has been a little bit of I would say a different direction for Stephen King. He emerged with some genre-defying works during this time frame. First of which we can talk about, which came out in November of 2011.
Oh, jumping right in. Do it.
11/22/63.
Oh my God. Oh, you're hitting me right out of the gate with a tough one.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite Stephen King novels.
Yeah. Do you want to just get right into the book?
Sure, I can just give a brief synopsis and then we can just talk about it a little bit.
Let's do it.
So Jake Epping is a high school teacher from Lisbon Falls, Maine, and he also teaches a GED program for adults. When he reads an essay about Harry Dunning's father, who killed his mother, sister, and brother with a hammer, he barely escaped that. and he's left with a lifelong limp. So as Jake starts to talk about this essay with his friend Al, who runs a local diner, Al decides to show him what's hidden in the storeroom, which is a portal to 1958, a specific day in 1958, and it's only a portal to that specific day.
I feel like we should mention that every diner has its own portal.
Right.
To
That's
a
why
specific
diners
day.
are so magical.
Yeah, they all have it. And the quality of the diner really depends on where that portal goes. I mean, if it's going to a place that has good ingredients, then you're in luck.
Or cheaper ingredients.
Yeah.
So
But
Al,
if it's like a portal to Chernobyl,
yeah, not
like,
good.
Yeah.
Al asks Jake to surveil and to really get to know Lee Harvey Oswald, and then ultimately attempt to prevent the John F. Kennedy assassination,
And
which takes place on 11/22/1963.
He's got it all worked out too. He's got money from that era,
Yep.
Cash, clothing. He's got the lingo. This man is
he starts to get the lingo because this is 5 years before
the
actual assassination.
I'm talking about the diner owner. By the time
Al,
you meet him,
yes.
Al has got this amazing system worked out where he's been doing this for a long, long time.
And Al has tried.
Yeah,
But Al
has
is
tried.
now old.
Well, and Al has discovered something that becomes a kind of a core theme of the book, is that when you mess with time messes back.
Yes. And so Jake begins his life as George Amberson. He meets and begins working at a school, meets Sadie, who becomes the love of his life.
Yeah.
And also surveils and does try to prevent, or does he? And maybe he does prevent.
Well,
so
a couple of things you should mention. The rules around this portal are that when you step through it, you begin, one journey. If you go back to the present, you reset everything. So everything, basically everything you've done in the past has now created a new timeline. If you come back to the present, everything that you've done will affect how things are now. But if you go back through the portal a second time, you basically hit a wipe. You just reset everything to how it was in 1958 on that day.
The ultimate Groundhog Day.
Basically, if you fuck up, you can come back and then just step through it again and try it again. But it's a 5-year wait.
So as he gets to November 22nd, 1963, throughout the novel, we see how many times that date comes up, how many times he goes back, how many times he has affected the future,
how many times he meets Sadie.
Yes, how many times he stepped out of the diner portal into present day, and it is nothing like he's experienced.
Oh, it's, there's a lot of the butterfly effect going on. There's the trash can man. No.
Green
Sorry,
card
that's
man.
The trash can man is from The Stand. I'm sorry. It's all part of the Kingiverse, but it gets, it's very twisty turny. It has a lot of sci-fi elements, light on the horror. I'd say it's more science fiction and
a love
thriller.
story.
But yeah, at its core, it really is a romance, just a beautiful and devastating love story.
And I would say ultimately, and this is something that Stephen King has said, that he originally had the idea in the 1970s. He said it was right around a 20th anniversary of the assassination. And he asked himself the question, what if John F. Kennedy had lived? And the daunting historical research and the conspiracy theorists and the imposter syndrome, he was afraid of starting this book. He did start it actually and stopped, but he wasn't ready to take it on. He said he didn't prove himself as a writer.
I think that was a good call, because it's Stephen King's often been criticized for his endings, and I will go on record as saying that this may be one of his best endings.
Yes.
It's wrapped up perfectly. Not
the way you want it to.
No, but it is an ending, and it is poetic, and it does fit, and it's the only ending that made sense.
Yes.
and it's wonderful. I mean, it's a work that I'm not sure a younger Stephen King could have pulled off. It is one of his more contemplative books.
And this is his
its
first
examination of like just the choices we make, the sacrifices we make for the greater good or your own moral compass, the things you give up along the way.
What ends up being the most important thing in life. And
how things may not work out the way you game them in your head. It's really interesting to see how the main character's actions affect the present when he makes those trips back.
And it also, what I found most interesting about this novel, now Stephen King, this is his first historical novel that he's written. And he ultimately wanted to tell a story. You know, the historical research needed to be accurate, but he still wanted to tell a story. And what I found, it sort of had, I wouldn't say that the beginning of the novel is slow at all, but it had that Moby Dick quality of where the last quarter of the book was so like heart-wrenching.
Yeah, there's
fast and
it's
and
a
things
big
were
book.
happening
It's a long
quickly
one.
And
Yeah.
also time doesn't want to be changed. That was
Yes.
one of the themes in the book.
And the it's a proportionate response. So the harder you push, the more you change, the harder time pushes back. And
how things happen to prevent you from, like, ultimately his mission, Jake's mission as George, how time was really working against him.
Yeah, there's like a final destination element to it of like you can't escape fate. And ultimately, one of the more fascinating elements of the novel is how do you measure success on a mission like this? Because I can't even say anymore. I'll just give away the whole ending. But it's an honorable mission to embark upon, save JFK's life, and what ends up happening is a little unexpected.
He does go back to present day with different outcomes of his attempt to prevent this assassination.
Yeah, I mean, it calls into question like the role tragedy and tragic events play. If you had the capacity to stop them, should you stop them? Even though it's a tragic event, would stopping that from happening lead to something even worse happening? You can't know. Right. That's the butterfly effect.
Yeah. But like we both said, it's a love story at its core.
It really
is about, just people existing in the world and trying to make a life for themselves.
And like a lot of Stephen King's work, it's about regular flawed people doing their best and making a mess of things along the way, but with the best of intentions. And his characters are extremely human and relatable and understandable. Even when they're doing things you don't agree with or fucking up, you get it.
And what our futuristic understanding of Lee Harvey Oswald is going back into time, and that is your mission essentially, and then it gets more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do the trifecta of wild conspiracy theories, watch Oliver Stone's JFK, read this book, and then watch The Irishman, and I think you get like pretty much every fucking theory about, except for aliens,
Right.
Back into the left.
So you want to move on to the next?
To the left. Actually, before we move on to the next work, I want to contextualize this time in Stephen King's life a little bit.
Oh, great. I love that.
So, yeah, you mentioned we're going back to, around 2011 or so to the present. And, like all old men in their 70s, Stephen King decided to change things up quite a lot. I mean, we all know that men, when they get older, they become more adventurous and open-minded. So Stephen King, you mentioned earlier, he branches out into different genres than, we know him for. It's not that he hasn't written non-horror novels. It's just he really goes for it in this decade. Mm-hmm. Obviously, probably the most successful and well-known is his Mr. Mercedes trilogy, beginning with Mr. Mercedes, that has become its own juggernaut, branching out with the fan favorite character of Holly Gibney into, the novella If It Bleeds, into The Outsider, into the upcoming novel Holly.
Yeah,
it has
it's
been
crime
adapted.
fiction. He's never written crime fiction.
Exactly. Well, it's detective crime fiction. He tried, I think, a sort of stylized Raymond Chandler-esque earlier, but this is more serious and a little less flashy. And it's I have to admit, I have seen some of the adaptation with Brendan Gleeson, and I have seen The Outsider, but I have not read the book. But my beloved co-host has
books, and I have. So, did you want to talk about The Keyhole though? Because that.
Well, I mean, I'll get into that, but did you want to mention anything about Mr. Mercedes since you've read the book and I haven't?
Yeah, I have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, this is Stephen King, top of his game, 40 years into his career. He pivots in his 60s into his 70s, and he pivots wildly.
Yeah, he said that he's read mystery fiction and suspense his whole life.
For sure.
He said that he doesn't have the ability to write like an Agatha Christie murder mystery because he doesn't know the outcome at the beginning.
That's a good point, because he's always said that his characters tell him where the story goes, whereas Agatha Christie or Patricia Highsmith, those stories are so meticulously crafted and plotted out that, well, it's like Alfred Hitchcock would write out and storyboard every single frame of his second of his movie before shooting it. It's why he always came in on time and on budget, because he could see everything in his head as it would show up on the screen, and that's pretty rare.
Yeah. So he said that he wanted to really pivot to crime fiction, and this collection, these 3 novels, are known as the Bill Hodges trilogy. And Stephen King likes to get ideas from real stories, real life happenings, and he said that in 2008 he heard a story that happened in North Carolina where a woman plowed down job seekers lined up outside of a McDonald's because her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend were in line. So he started to develop this idea for Mr. Mercedes, which came out in June 2014, where a lone driver plows through a crowd of job seekers in a stolen Mercedes and escapes. And at the start of this trilogy, Bill Hodges is a depressed alcoholic and retired cop detective, and
Stephen
he was
King
unable.
Writing an alcoholic character? That is,
I know.
No, actually, that fits.
He basically spun into this depression after his failure to close and solve this murder of 8 people from Mr. Mercedes. Then he receives a letter from Mr. Mercedes himself, i.e. Brady Hartsfield. And it intrigues him to clean himself up and start his own investigation. He comes across Holly Gibney, who is part of the story already because the stolen Mercedes belonged to her sister. And
she's like a amateur sleuth investigator.
Well, she becomes one. She suffers from OCD. She has sensory processing disorder, and she's on the autism spectrum. Mm-hmm. But she's got like a real brilliant ability to analyze and observe different patterns. And she becomes a real critical component and partners with Bill in order to help solve this crime.
So Stephen King in the past has tried, with very mixed results, to write people with different cognitive abilities on the spectrum, people with disabilities. And it hasn't always worked out, but the characterization of Holly Gibney, again, this is a book I don't think he could have written as well as a younger man, because it just shows a maturity and a compassion and a realism where it's like, okay, yes, this does seem like a much more realistic and authentic representation of somebody who is on the spectrum.
Yeah. So now we go into the second of the trilogy, Finders Keepers, that came out 1 year later in June 2015. And it's about a vengeful reader. So you all know how he addresses his readers.
Oh, yeah, a faithful reader.
Correct. So this is about a vengeful reader named John Rothstein.
He's approached that subject a couple of times.
Yeah, he has.
Yeah.
So John Rothstein is an author who created a famous character named Jimmy Gold and hasn't published in decades. So Morris, his number one fan, this vengeful reader, is angry and goes to rob and kill the author. Takes his cash, finds all his Moleskine notebooks filled with an unpublished gold novel. So he hides the money and the notebooks and then gets arrested and sent to jail for a totally unrelated crime.
You know, just one crime at a time, guys. Don't do totally unrelated crimes while you're criming.
Many decades later, Pete, who his family has now moved into the area where Morris buried this treasure, finds these books and decides to make money off of it.
Dick move.
So Bill Hodges and Holly come back and get involved to try to help save Pete and get Morris for the Rothstein murder, which was never solved.
Yeah. Oh, so they're into these cold cases.
Yeah, so they start to work together, and really from that emerges their final part in the trilogy, End of Watch, which came out in June 2016.
Not to be confused with the Jake Gyllenhaal shaved head movie, where he's like a cop beating the shit out of everybody.
Right. So Bill Hodges is back trying to finally get Brady Hartsfield. Now, you'll remember him from Mr. Mercedes because he is Mr. Mercedes.
And now he is now settled down with Mrs. BMW and
so
very happy.
Brady Hartsfield is now, and this is where you'll start to see the emergence of the Kingiverse really start to take shape. This has elements of Firestarter and Carrie. This has elements of some of its other works.
Wow.
And so Hartsfield is now has a terrible brain injury, and he's in a induced coma. So he's basically a comatose patient in a hospital, long-term facility, but he's well cared for. He gets manicures, he gets baths, he has a TV, he gets taken care of and read to. But what they don't know is this brain injury caused a telekinetic ability in Brady.
Oh.
So what?
Like that movie Patrick.
Yeah.
You ever see that? The
Yes.
Australian movie Patrick, where it is the comatose kid who can kill with his mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Fucked up.
Hodges and Bill Hodges and Holly, now that they have their organization, their investigative agency called Finders Keepers, they start to really investigate what is happening with Brady.
Nice.
Because there's something strange going on. They find out that he can influence others from his hospital bed within the hospital to commit crimes on the outside.
Oh, little Hannibal Lecter style.
And there's a
manipulation.
hypnotic electronic phishing game which compels the user to commit suicide, and he begins targeting the kids that went to a concert that this mass murder that Brady had envisioned was foiled by Bill Hodges and Holly. So now from his hospital bed, Hartsfield tries to get all of those kids to commit suicide and starts to target Bill Hodges and Holly and Jerome.
It's a real multitasker.
Yeah, who, foiled his master plan. So he's on a revenge kick as well.
And all from a coma. What have you done today, listener?
I will say that End of Watch has a very sad ending.
Bummer.
But we will see Holly Gibney appear in a couple other works.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the newest novel coming out, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in May 2018, with The Outsider, Holly comes back.
She sure does.
So, do you want to take a quick break and
Yeah, that sounds great.
we can come back and chat more about this decade?
Love it. Getting away with literal murder takes skills, and baby, you've got 'em. But when it comes to crafting the perfect costume, well, let's just say your talents lie elsewhere. Maybe mommy never taught you to sew before you killed her and stole her face. Maybe you have knives for hands or husky meat paws, perfect for bashing campers, but not so great at threading a needle. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve to look cool. So come on down to Tears of a Clown Makeup and Costume Emporium and treat yourself to the obscene makeover your parents always suspected was hiding just beneath the surface. At Tears of a Clown Makeup and Costume Emporium, we look past your tired flesh suit to bring out the real you. Working together to determine your nightmare-inducing look, our team of sartorial sadists will assist you with all the fittings, measurements, and elective surgeries. So save your creativity for your ironic kill tableaus. From sloppy clown fits to demonic priest and everything in between, we guarantee a look to satisfy the monster within. If you're unhappy with your look, come on back in and we'll straight up kill you. Be sure to ask about our Cenobite special. Get one half of your head riveted with nails, get the other half free. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. Dressing up is cool, hurting people is not. Seriously, I shouldn't have to tell you this.
And we're back.
Oh, so back, and buy whatever that was.
Or don't.
No, spend your money on us.
Maybe it might not be for you.
Lavish us with money. That's why we're doing this. We don't care about horror. We just care about monies. And we thought the best way to make a lot of it was pay for our own podcast. Oh.
These are fake ads.
Oh, boy. On a fake product on a horror-themed podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, welcome back. Hi. So, as we talked about, and beloved co-host went into the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, this has been a fascinating time for Stephen King creatively. He is taking risks.
Yeah, we see historical
fiction.
We see crime.
Yeah, true
drama,
crime,
noir crime.
Exactly. He's doing new things, which is awesome. And also, he's doing them in the Stephen King way, meaning he's great at it.
He's still the master storyteller we've known and loved for decades.
This is not like when your favorite rock musician puts out like a country album and you're like, oh my God, this is the worst. Just do the thing that you're good at. Well, that's everything for Stephen King. So.
It's sort of like when the Jonas Brothers disbanded and MGMT came out.
Honestly, I'm just not ready to talk about that yet.
They're great.
I am not ready. I'm still.
They're back together, Richard.
Yeah, but now they're having sex, okay? So it's different. Anyway, in addition to all of this creative explosion, this expanding of his horizons, of his oeuvre, he does the opposite thing, which is really starts spending his time in this decade mentoring, collaborating, and passing the torch in a way. And he does that with his kids and with his friends, but in a way that you really would hope a true master of their craft would do at this stage in their career. So obviously he has worked on some really successful collaborations with his son, Joe Hill, who is an incredibly talented author in his own right, has written some amazing work. Horns and Nosferatu.
Heart-Shaped Box.
Yep. Heart-Shaped Box is amazing. So he collaborated.
Also, he's behind the Lock and Key series.
And the incredible comic book. So he worked on In the Tall Grass and Throttle with Joe Hill. And with his other son, Owen King, he co-wrote the novel Sleeping Beauties. Mm-hmm. Now, in addition to that, he also collaborated with Richard Chizmar. Now, shout out to Richard Chizmar, a real OG. He is the creator of the legendary literary horror magazine Cemetery Dance, which I have been reading my entire life. I mean, it's not a man that I was super familiar with, but one of just those incredible unsung heroes that you find out, oh, you've been behind some of my favorite things all this time. So he collaborated.
Always lovely.
I know, right? So he's published a lot of King's work, and I guess they know each other, and they collaborated on the Gwendy series, which I haven't read yet, but they just wrapped that up, I believe, with a third entry.
Yeah, Gwendy's Final Task.
Yes.
So in this decade, we saw Gwendy's Button Box and Gwendy's Final Task.
Gwendy's Button Box sounds like something you'd look up in Urban Dictionary. Or maybe get arrested for, depending on which state you're in. So the other thing that we're seeing, speaking of collaborations, listen, I know a lot about Stephen King. I've been reading Stephen King my whole life. I did not know that in 2012, he wrote and released a musical called Ghost Brothers of Darkland County, with music written by John Mellencamp.
Wow.
FKA Johnny Cougar, John Cougar Mellencamp, and Johnny John Johnson Cougarheimer Jingle Spittenkamp. I think was the last one he ended up on. But yeah, old Johnny Cougar and Stephen King wrote a fucking musical together. And it's been produced. It's been, I don't know if it's made its way down old Broadway, the Great White Way, but it has played, nationally, and I did not know about it. So, Stephen, this is definitely the decade of Stephen King doing whatever the fuck he wants to do.
I mean, did you know about his rock band, the Rock Bottom Remainders?
He's been in that forever with a bunch of other nerd authors.
Oh,
it's so awesome.
Yep.
Like, it's just a bunch of dorky writers doing their hobbies together and having fun.
Yep.
Doesn't he play guitar or like slide guitar or something?
Yeah. Dave Barry, Stephen King, Amy Tan.
Yeah.
James McBride, Mitch Albom. Blum.
Yeah, Mitch. Yeah. The Tuesdays with Maury author.
Roy Blunt Jr. Barbara Kingsolver.
Imagine being in the audience, just being like, "Yeah, Dave Barry, yeah."
Matt Groening and honorary member Maya Angelou. Graining. Yeah.
Honorary member Maya Angelou?
Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What did she play?
She was an honorary member, so I think she probably did some spoken word.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did know that. So, he's got the passion.
He's always said that he used to listen to like Metallica and other like Anthrax while he was writing. Now he listens to, like rock and metal when he edits. He can't do it when he writes anymore.
It definitely fits his style of, he's got the recurring Americana themes throughout his books.
His son, The Heart-Shaped Box.
It's about an aging rock star.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So just a couple other things I want to mention. This is also the era of Twitter Stephen King, which is one of my favorite versions of Stephen King. Now, Twitter, I know it's very popular to say this nowadays, but I think even before Elon Musk took over, it was a goddamn wasteland nightmare. I don't think it's great, but Stephen King on Twitter is an absolute delight because the man, unlike a lot of other creatives who, rely on fans for their income, he will tell you what he thinks. He always has. I mean, he's been an outspoken, about his beliefs in politics. He endorsed Gary Hart in 1984. I mean, he's always been unafraid to voice his opinion, and
he is a voter.
He is, yes, and a human being who has opinions, and will straight up come out on Twitter and speak truth to power, which is really interesting when he goes after like Donald Trump or Elon Musk, and he just really does it. But the other thing that he does on Twitter that I love is just shouts out whatever creative thing he's into, like whatever TV show he likes. He just randomly, without anyone asking, without a publicist reaching out to him to like solicit it, he'll just say, "Hey, I just caught this thing on Netflix. Name the creators." I mean, imagine being a young new showrunner and Stephen King tweets about you.
Yeah, exactly.
That has got to be euphoric. And he's, again, just using his influence, his power, his position to joyously lift up other creators, some of whom he's never met. He's just a fan. And he actually says, I'm just like
he
anybody
loves
else.
to read.
I'm
He
a fan.
likes to watch, movies and TV shows.
And,
so why wouldn't he have an opinion?
It's that kind of style that honestly has been a big inspiration for a beloved co-host and I to do this podcast in the manner that we do it, as a celebration of the thing we love, not, being super critical of it or finding flaws and faults or things to be unhappy about, but really just getting together and having a good time with this thing that we all agree we like,
Also, I hope that over the course of these 4 deep dive episodes, you all have gotten an understanding that to say Stephen King writes horror is really just typecasting.
Sure. Oh, I mean, first and foremost, he is a writer.
He's a storyteller.
Yes.
And he tells a lot of different types of stories. And there are many, whether you think you like horror or you don't, there are many, many ways in which you can access Stephen King. Through his nonfiction, through his fiction, through his adaptations, or through the things that he's been interested in and watched and liked.
It's funny you should mention that, because one really fascinating way to get a sense of Stephen King is by reading the critical and audience reception to his work over the years. Now, pretty much across the board, audience reception to his work is usually positive. Critical reception all over the place. There are, and it's a bit of a litmus test. You want to find out who the snobby critics are? Read a Stephen King review.
Yeah.
There are some of the, more elitist type critics who just maintain that he doesn't write literature, that his work is, as a former CEO of Simon & Schuster, his own fucking publisher, Richard Snyder, said his work was non-literature. And Richard Snyder said that in 2003 when Stephen King won the National Book Award, which is just great timing and a real nice thing to do, buddy. That was a nice circle back moment 20 years later when Simon & Schuster was trying to merge with Penguin Random House, which had already merged. There are only 5 major publishers left in America now, and 2 of them were trying to merge, Simon & Schuster being Stephen King's own publisher, and Stephen King testified against them, saying that a merger of this size would
it's a monopoly.
Yeah, exactly. It's anti-American. It's a monopoly. It's anti-competition. It would hurt authors. It would hurt small publishers. It would hurt small businesses. And his testimony was so eloquent and played a pivotal role in the judge blocking the merger.
Wow. That's
so
great.
Richard Snyder, eat shit. Don't go after the king.
Don't go after somebody who can construct and weave a story and weave
and who's
elements.
made your company like untold
has
millions
a
of
whole
dollars.
Universe that he weaves into all his books, so he remembers what you said about him.
You gotta decide who are you going to listen to, because his defenders, are largely other writers
and readers,
loyal
readers.
Rushing to his defense are writers as varied as Margaret Atwood, Orson Scott Card, who I know has his own problematic opinions, but whatever. It's usually other writers that are coming in and saying to call this not literature is so snobby and so incorrect. It's just whatever your opinion is, this is literature. Orson Scott Card said something to the effect of, you can't call this non-literature because it is written, published, read, and admired by people. So
what I would love to see is to take an excerpt from a book like 11/22/63 and read it without any context, telling who the author is or what it's from, in front of all these snobs.
Yeah.
To determine, is this literature?
Listen, it's
I'm
kind of the same feeling I have.
They will be like, absolutely.
It's the same feeling I have about like the Academy Awards. Is like, there's a certain kind of movie that always gets nominated, even if it's not a very good movie. It just has to hit the dramatic beats that the 95-year-old average aged Academy voter really digs. So
just name one author whose novels could make as big of an impact on a person as Stephen King has.
Oh, sorry. Shit.
I mean, we this is our 4th episode of many decades worth.
Name one other author that Terror in Tandem has done 4 episodes on.
Name one other author
in the many, many years.
Whose most recent decade of written works rivals one of the most incredibly creative decade plus of
That's
works.
what I'm saying. This is the time in most men's lives when they are
hiring
closing
grad
down.
students to write for them.
Yeah. Yes. If you're the James Patterson type, your main contribution is writing your name in a larger font than the person that actually wrote the book with your name on it. But if you're Stephen King, what you decide to do in your twilight years is greatly expand your literary horizons, start publishing in genres you've never published in before, and kick ass at all of it.
Yeah.
Go on Twitter and give your unvarnished opinion about whatever the fuck you want. It doesn't affect your sales at all. Stephen King could shed 1 million readers.
Write a historical novel that you basically spent 40 plus years thinking about.
Spend some time with your kids writing books.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a time when I really feel like Stephen King is doing whatever he wants to do.
But also
and just
giving
get out of his
fans
way.
What they need.
Get out of his way and let him do it. He is the Viva El Rey. He's the king for a reason. But I am loving this phase of his life. Me
too. This is one of my favorite clusters of
It is.
works.
Yeah. It feels like he has never been more fertile with his ideas and his risk taking. We're also in an era of peak King adaptations. That's always
We'll probably do a episode on
I agree that
like written work to film.
I agree.
Versions.
I just want to quickly mention that it does seem lately like basically everything that this man has ever done is being optioned, being adapted, with the same sort of mixed results. But yes, that's the difference. Big budgets, big directors, big studios, big stars. Stephen King adaptations used to be pretty solidly B-movie entries for the most part, with a rare exception like Stand By Me. But we're also seeing kind of a passing of the torch from Mick Garris and Frank Darabont, who were Stephen King's most faithful adapters, to Mike Flanagan.
Yes.
And listen, we will get into all of that, but just shout out to Mike Flanagan. My gosh, Gerald's Game, Dr. Sleep, and the upcoming Dark Tower that he's working on. I can't think of anybody else that I would rather work on the Dark Tower than Mike Flanagan. Speaking of the Dark Tower,
King of the Segway,
I have another book from this time that I'd like to talk about a little bit, and that is 2012's The Wind Through the Keyhole. Oh, this really felt like a gift. So what The Wind Through the Keyhole is, it's a sort of a side tale of the Dark Tower series. It's not a main numbered entry. There are 7 books in the Dark Tower series, but chronologically in the series, it takes place between book 4 and 5, between Wizard and Glass and Wolves of the Kala. Now, the story is Roland and his quartet. They're traveling along, and a something called a Stark Blast, which is a kind of a demonic storm, is bearing down on them. So they take shelter in a cabin, and Roland weaves them a tale of his younger days, chasing a skin man, which is what they call werewolves in Midworld, with his old friend Jamie DeCurry, who's one of his earlier friends like Cuthbert and Elaine. You only hear about kind of in these old stories. So it's sort of like a classic bottle episode of a book where there's the wraparound story of the quartet traveling and taking shelter from the storm. Then there's the story that Roland tells them of his youth. And then within that story, young Roland tells the story of The Wind Through the Keyhole, which is a Midworld legend of Merlin and all that. So it's a story in a story in a story. It's great. It is. I read this after I had finished the Dark Tower series because that concluded in 2007. This came out 5 years later. You could certainly read this chronologically. After Wizard and Glass, you could fit this in. I recommend you read the whole Dark Tower series and then read Wind Through the Keyhole. And the reason for that is The Dark Tower series is a very, very long journey. And returning to these characters after everything they go through really feels like just a nice walk into the sunset. A little last farewell, a wave goodbye after the pain and, the sadness and the hardship that they go through. As any long journey nears its end, not everybody makes it. So revisiting these characters in this way, knowing that at the end of the story, everyone's going to be okay because there's still a couple of books left to go, you can just fully relax and enjoy. It does have the feeling like you are a member of the quartet sitting down, and Stephen King / Roland is sitting by the fire telling you a story while you listen to the demons, scream outside in the Stark Blast. It's a great book. It's a nice re-entry after, a few years away. Again, it might be a different experience if you read it all chronologically. I liked it because the Dark Tower ends. It's a tough ending in a lot of ways. It's very complicated. And returning to characters that are so beloved in this way, it kind of felt like Stephen King going, all right, I know you're sad about Eddie and Susanna and Jake and Roland, so here's one last happy time together. And thank you. I appreciated it. Rude.
Well, what I was really thinking too, while I was, putting together my list, I mean, the reality is Stephen King is 75 years old.
My God.
And I think that there's a lot of endings that are happening for him here.
Well, I just want to explain the reason I laughed when you said 75 is I briefly envisioned what, if I am fortunate enough to make it to 75, what I will be doing at that age, and then comparing it to what Stephen King is doing at 75. It's like, I'm going to be like gumming pudding out of a cup.
But what I think he's doing is giving his readers, his loyal readers, the endings to characters and storylines that they need.
Sure, yeah.
Following through on ideas, genre ideas that he's always held on to and wanted to really embrace.
There is a sense that of a man at that age who,
bucket list check off.
Yeah, I can sense his mortality. It's like David Bowie when he released that last album, but nobody knew he was sick, and then you listen to it now and you're like, oh my God, he was saying goodbye to us. This
is him. He doesn't want to leave the stories untold.
Yeah, and listen, there's another older white author with a long-running series out there that I'd like to please follow this lesson. Wrap up your story.
Do you want to talk about another sort of multi-decade revisit
I really do.
to a very well-known story with Dr. Sleep? I really do.
Yes. Dr. Sleep, coming out just 1 year after Wind of the Keyhole. And actually, it's interesting because at a reading several years earlier that was being moderated by none other than our favorite David Cronenberg, he mentioned he was working on 2 books. One of them was about Roland and his quartet, and another one was revisiting The Overlook.
Yes.
And that ended up being 2012's Wind Through the Keyhole and 2013's Dr. Sleep.
So whatever happened to Danny Torrance?
Exactly.
That's the question.
Now, one thing to keep in mind, this is a sequel to the novel, not a sequel to the movie. Now, the movie directed by Stanley Kubrick is an all-time fucking classic movie. It's amazing.
It is not
incredible.
The novel.
It's a wild... It's pretty faithful to the novel up until the last third of the movie, and then it really does its own thing. And Stephen King famously, loudly, vociferously hates the movie because Stanley Kubrick didn't give a shit. He did his own thing. So that's
and some
important.
People, and here's the other thing, a lot of people that saw The Shining then went back to the novel that they had never read.
That's the way I did it.
And expected.
I was very
ending.
Surprised.
I read The Shining before I saw The Shining.
Oh.
And I found each to be really equally wonderful.
Well,
in their own right.
There are two main differences here that one of them makes sense. One of them is a little bit more problematic. Now, the one major deviation from The Shining, the novel, to the movie is the hedge maze creatures coming to life and chasing him. You couldn't do that in 1980, not effectively. I understand that. The other major difference is Dick Halloran in the book, he survives because Jack goes after everybody with a sledgehammer in the book. And he hits Dick Halloran and he injures him pretty badly, but he does make it. Now, in the movie, Scatman Crothers wonderfully plays Dick Halloran, makes it all the way to the Overlook and gets hit with an axe within like 3 goddamn seconds of opening the front door. It's an ignoble death. It is not a good way for him to die. And it's sort of weird that Stanley Kubrick chose to kill Dick Halloran so like unceremoniously.
Nonsensically too.
Literal one non-white character. Yeah.
It was just for the violence of it.
It was it's a decision I still to this day don't quite understand. But
back to the sequel.
Now, the book, that's important because Dick Halloran plays a pretty big part in Danny's life. Now,
and this is sort of like, I think, too, Stephen King's saying...
Oh, yes.
Excuse me,
yes.
But this novel existed before the film, and
yes.
This is where it is always meant to go.
There is very much that sense of Stephen King going, okay, everybody, you've had your fun, but here's the actual story from the guy who fucking wrote it. And you know what? I'm going to get it out there. This book rules.
It does.
It's
a great book.
Really good. So part of the book picks up right after the events of The Shining. So we see, an injured Wendy and Dick escaping to Florida with young Danny, and they are traumatized and fucked up. So Wendy is recovering, and she's a mess. At the same time, Dick is teaching young Danny how to control the Shining, how to hone his skills. So then the book kind of picks up a few decades later. Danny is in his 40s.
Not doing well.
He has, like so many children of alcoholics, himself become an alcoholic. Now, it's pretty understandable, given his traumatic childhood, his alcoholic lineage with his father, and the fact that alcohol numbs the Shining, which is sometimes very intrusive and uncontrollable and painful. So where the story picks up, Danny has been living this transient lifestyle, traveling around, being drunk, and being kind of a piece of shit, honestly.
Love him and leave him, doing lots of drugs.
He's definitely hates himself, punishes himself, but like a lot of people who hate and punish themselves, they leave a lot of collateral damage in their wake, and he does too. It actually reminded me a lot of Joe Hill's Heart-Shaped Box.
Yeah.
That main character, just the way he lived his life. So Danny is cleaning up his act. He ends up in this small town in New Hampshire, takes a job in a hospice facility because now that he stopped drinking, the Shining is coming back, and he can sense when someone's about to die. And he uses his gift to ease their passage. It's actually quite beautiful. And he finds...
it's sort of, this is the answer to the question of why do I have the Shining?
He finds purpose, and for a while his life is pretty nice. Now, another thing happens at this time is a young girl named Abra is born, and as a tiny, tiny baby, seems to predict the 9/11 terrorist attack. So she starts reaching out. She's very powerful with the Shining, possibly the most powerful ever born. She starts reaching out as a little child, sort of haphazardly, and finds Danny.
Well, she finds Tony.
Yes.
Danny's imaginary friend.
Tony. So, throughout Abra's childhood, she psychically communicates with Danny, and they communicate back and forth, and she kind of treats him like her imaginary friend. One night, Abra is experimenting with the Shining, reaching out, and she reaches out to Rose the Hat. Now, here's the thing. Stands to reason that if Abra and Danny exist, and Dick existed, And there are other people out there with The Shining, and maybe not all of them are as altruistic. So here's where we meet the True Knot.
Mm-hmm.
The True Knot, this is classic Stephen King shit right here. It's this vagabond group of transients roaming the forgotten highways of America. I mean, what's more Stephen King than that?
Almost like a traveling performers.
Yes, and Stephen King is such he was born in 1947, so he's such a product of the boomer years. So the interstate system plays such a heavy role in a lot of his works because, that was being built up in the 50s, in Eisenhower.
Even with Danny, he goes from little small town to small town, picks up these odd jobs.
And you see it in so many of his other works.
Lives in like
the back roads, the travelers.
Small apartment of a building, a hardware store.
Stephen King has a real fondness for the transients, for the people drifting from town to town. So anyway, the True Knot is a group of shiners. Now, they are essentially immortal because the way they use their ability is they suck the souls out of the dying, which they call steam because it kind of looks like steam coming out of your mouth. But only people with the gift can see that. Now, the thing about steam is the more pain someone's in at the moment of death, the more steam and the purer that steam is. Also, once you start using that shit, you have to keep using it. Now, Abra reaches out and touches Rose at a moment they are torturing a small child to death. And Abra freaks out, and Rose sees her. And a couple of things happen.
And Rose realizes this is one powerful get. Because
the True Knot's been on the road for a long, long time, and they are not doing well. They're running out of steam. Running on empty. But they are also dying. This last kiddo that they killed gave them all measles, and they don't have defenses for that, and they're dying off. So Rose needs to find, torture, and kill Abra to get this pure, powerful steam to save herself and to save her people. Now, they are undeniably evil bastards, but classic Stephen King, you do sort of kind of get them. They're characterized. They are fleshed out. These are a group of people that have known each other for 100 years or more. They're close. They love each other. There are bonds there. So, they are clearly the villains, but they're written in a way that it's much more interesting than just some, mustache twirling evil. So anyway, this all leads to the inevitable confrontation of Danny rushing to save Abra from the True Knot and this pretty awesome psychic battles that take place. It
absolutely.
Is rad.
It is, and again,
it has everything.
The good versus evil, the bad versus good, but they're bleeding into each other because Danny is very flawed.
Danny
he's a piece of shit. He's done a lot of bad things.
He's a broken. And when he goes on this quest to save Abra, he's been on a path of redemption for a few years at that point, and he's made his peace, and he's come around, and this is his redemption, and his purpose. Why he's been through so much pain and tragedy and trauma is been preparing him to save this innocent girl with this incredible, possibly world-changing power. It's a wonderful book. It wraps up the story of The Shining. It's a logical place for Danny to end up. His characterization is so human and so understandable, even throughout his many fuck-ups. You root for him, and he's just, I don't know. I'm always more interested in a character who is flawed and doing their best than some superhuman Jason Bourne type that can never fail. That's fun for a while, but it's like God mode on video games. It gets boring. You need a challenge. I love Stephen King's ability to write these traumatized, laden with baggage, flawed, struggling human people who rise to the occasion. And it's a reminder, I think, not to get too saccharine about it, but we're really, really quick to judge each other. But you'll notice in a tragedy, when things go wrong, that you will see communities, their first instinct is to help, is to bond together, is to rescue the stranger. And Stephen King, for all of his political activism and his snark is very much a humanist and a believer in humanity and an optimist. I mean, read his works and you see that throughout, for every despicable villain, for every true knot, there is just a regular person rising to meet something they never thought they'd have to do.
Yeah. Well, to segue into that comment that you just made, which is, the judgment, immediate judgment of people, we have The Outsider.
Oh, yes.
So The Outsider was published in May 2018. Just a brief synopsis. They find an 11-year-old boy's mutilated corpse in a town park. Eyewitnesses and fingerprints point to the local English teacher, Little League coach, father, husband, Terry Maitland.
Yeah.
And Detective Ralph Anderson orders his arrest to be public.
Yeah, that's the big inciting moment of the story.
That is, you're guilty.
Yeah.
Now you are guilty.
He arrests him at a game in front of all
everybody.
the students, handcuffs him. Like, it doesn't matter what comes out in the trial. That's it.
That's public opinion right there.
Yeah. And that's a purposeful move that cops do all the time.
And there are consequences to Terry because of this public arrest.
Oh, for sure.
But later, when Terry's alibi checks out,
oops,
the investigation unveils something much more sinister, much more supernatural.
Yes.
And the reemergence of Holly, she begins to work with some local police to assist in the investigation.
I found it so interesting that taking Holly out of the Mr. Mercedes world is when they start introducing more supernatural elements. And then End of Watch brings that back. Did End of Watch come out after The Outsider?
No.
Oh, okay. So she did deal with some supernatural shit first.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. My bad.
Which is why she was recommended to work on this case, because she had that
It's interesting, like, that Stephen King started her character in a sort of more realistic, straight version of the world, and then a few books in, he was like, fuck it, I can't help myself.
No, isn't that how we all find our true paths in life? You start small.
I just like to think that he couldn't help it. Like, after a couple books, he's like, I gotta throw in a monster. Yeah, I can't.
This is an extremely tense book.
It's so good.
The first half is really just sort of a mystery and horror about, who done it, and why does Terry keep insisting that he didn't do this. Now, there's proof. There's video proof that he was in two places at the same time.
DNA evidence.
Correct.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And while you're guessing, like, does he have a twin? Does he have like a twin brother out there that's killing people? It's much more Stephen King.
Yes. Well, and it's Stephen King's interpretation of an existing folktale.
Yeah, and he takes on that doppelganger, the double. Yeah. The Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde of it all.
It's really good.
And even the adaptation, the HBO adaptation, is highly recommended.
Fantastic.
Cynthia Erivo plays Holly Gibney, which I love that take.
Yeah, it's very different from the book version.
Yes,
but
she's white in the book versions, but doesn't mean she
much
can't.
Older.
Yes, that's correct. She is. She's a little frail, older lady.
Listen, Cynthia Erivo is amazing.
So great,
everything
but she does really great.
Just quick shout out to, what was that movie she was in? The El Royale hotel, the one about the hotel, but it's got this scene where she's singing and her voice is magnificent.
Oh, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was the first thing I ever saw her in, and I was like, oh my God. That movie wasn't that great though.
I mean, I would say this Outsider is mystery, horror, page turner. It is classic Stephen King. So if you think, he's doing all these things, crime dramas and wrapping up old stories and historical fiction. Well, guess what? The Outsider, he brings it all back around to those strange, horrific, supernatural, unexplained, normal things that happen in everyday life that unnormal, like the paranormal has
always been
a
a strength of his is it's the kind of the joke of Stephen King is he wakes up, takes a look at whatever's on his kitchen table and can write a novel about it being haunted. He famously wrote The Mangler, which was about a haunted laundry folding machine. And that got adapted into a movie.
Yeah.
So, starring Robert Englund.
Right. So now we're he wrote a collection of short story called If It Bleeds, and one of the short stories in that, Mr. Harrigan's Phone, just is really interesting the way that it sort of plays out. It has that very Stephen King storytelling vibe of where this young boy goes to read to an old man who's lost his sight or is losing his sight, can't read anymore. Then he dies, and he has a cell phone, his phone, and he leaves him voicemails and says, I want you to hurt this kid, or I'm really upset about this, and things start to happen.
It reminded me of Apt Pupil. It was another young man, older guy who's
and
not
we'll
who he
see
seems.
that this is a little similar to Fairy Tale when I get to talk about that. But next up, I want to talk about Billy Summers.
Okay, yeah.
So here's another little subgenre obsession of Stephen King's, of how he really gets into this crime noir.
Well, he's always been an outspoken Raymond Chandler fan.
Yes. So Billy Summers came out in August 2021. It is about the main character, Billy Summers. He's a gun for hire.
I mean, that is a very Raymond Chandler name.
Yeah. He's only going to do this last job. There's a lot of money. He wants out. He's one of the best snipers in the world because he was a decorated Iraq veteran and an ex-Marine, but he's been able to stay off the radar. But he gets hired to do this one final job, which requires him to spend time undercover as a resident in a small town, where he has office space rented out so he can write a book. And he ends up becoming part of this neighborhood and watching this person who he's supposed to gun down, and things start to emerge and unfold. He really has a weird feeling about this one. Why is this so easy? Why is he getting so much money? He's learned not to question these things, but he does start to question it. This is also a novel within a novel, because the character that he's playing, this David Lockwood writer character that he's playing, Billy Summers, he ends up writing this fake novel, but he writes it about himself, actually about his life and the horrors that he went through, both in the war and when he was growing up. So this novel starts to come to life as well. So it's really the man that hired him to do this, is he really interested in paying him? Does he really want this done? Or does he want to set Billy Summers up to get caught?
And this is just a one-off, right? I mean, it's a standalone
so far,
novel,
Yeah. I mean, Billy Summers won't be back in another novel.
Yeah.
Unless it's a prequel to this. But Stephen King was asked why he wrote this book, and this is true to form, where he collects these little ideas and images and then starts to weave a story around them. He said he saw a man in a basement apartment looking out of a window like a periscope and watching feet go by on the sidewalk, and he played with that idea for a while. Why is that guy there? And then he thought about the same guy in an office building on the top floor of a building near a courthouse. What's he doing there? Is he going to shoot somebody? Maybe he's going to shoot a bad guy. So that's part of where all this plot runs through.
Yeah.
And I found it to be a super quick read, really
it's a shorter
great,
one.
really engaging.
Yeah.
I thought it was amazing. Is well written, great story to tell.
That's awesome. I mean, it's again just it's not often you see somebody switching things up like this when they're so established in their career.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. And to be so good at it.
Absolutely.
You know, even Michael Jordan wasn't good at baseball when he tried that.
Yeah. We all remember that, don't we?
I mean,
for our younger listeners, they might, but he did.
We have younger listeners? We have listeners?
And then I just wanted to round it out with what, is currently in the read pile for many people I have been talking to lately and just read. Came out in September of 2022. Stephen King said, "What do I want to write during this pandemic that'll make me happy?" And this is the book.
Oh.
Fairy tale.
Nice. Now, what makes Stephen King happy, I'm guessing, is different than what I think normal people happy.
Charlie is a high school student whose mom was killed in a hit and run and whose father is grieving and a recovering alcoholic.
As we said, happy.
He meets Radar, the dog of the town recluse Howard Bodwich, and he's injured and needs help. So Charlie takes care of Radar for Howard, and then when Howard dies, he leaves Charlie information on what's been hiding in the shed, which is a portal to another world.
Again, these fucking portals, man.
Yeah.
There's portals everywhere.
When you wonder if there's like murder stuff in sheds, you might be surprised to know most of them are portals.
If you're asking yourself, is this a portal? Yes.
But the first part of this book is really laying out this relationship building between Charlie and Howard, and also Charlie and his dad. And as things start to progress and, Howard doesn't make it, Charlie has to make some decisions. And it goes into this whole sort of new time fantasy, almost like a parallel universe of the Talisman and
The Dark Tower?
The Dark Tower series.
Yeah.
And it has this really fantasy element to it of where he meets people along the way. It really, once he gets to through this portal, it's like Canterbury Tales, where he's meeting all of these characters along the way that have something to offer him, and
That's
they're
awesome.
Strange, and
Yeah.
they look strange, and
Yeah.
they're not human. I highly recommend it.
Kind of the classic hero's journey.
Yes, and it's fun.
Yeah.
And it's touching.
I haven't read it yet. I'm really looking forward to that one.
It just came out
Yeah.
in September.
It's a doorstopper, that's for sure. It's a big old.
It is. It's a big boy.
Big old book.
And if you want to plan ahead for your next September, Holly.
Yeah.
Which is the return of Holly Gibney.
Yay.
She is still running the Finders Keepers detective agency, and her task is finding a missing daughter. But her partner, the love of her life, has COVID.
Oh.
And her mother's just died. So a lot of things are going to happen. That's coming out in September. COVID? Yeah.
Wasn't that fun?
No,
it wasn't.
Stephen King famously said, "I could never let Holly Gibney go. She was supposed to be a walk-on character in Mr. Mercedes, and she just kind of stole the book and stole my heart."
That's amazing. I love it.
He's right. That character is so well drawn.
I hope when Stephen King passes from this world, he's greeted by all of his characters. Because he's made
not
them...
all of them. I don't want him
no,
to be greeted
like
by
the good
Pennywise.
ones. Yeah, no, not Randall Flagg or Pennywise, but like the way he has talked about some of his creations as if they are living, breathing, functioning creatures with agency and decision making and sentience, it's why his books read so authentically.
Yeah.
It's because he spends so much time on characterization over plot and allows the characters to drive the plot as opposed to just reacting to it.
And sometimes he has an idea, and then the idea tells him where the story is going to go.
And then other times he writes Dreamcatcher. So you never know. it's always going to be interesting. Even Dreamcatcher or the Tommyknockers, which I would argue are his two worst books, they're not, I'm not like upset that I read them. They are interesting. I did get something out of it for sure. And I never get to the end of a Stephen King book and go, well, that was a fucking waste of time. Even his misses are fabulous misses. They're just the spectacular disasters. When he swings in a miss, he always takes a big swing. So it's just admirable. It's always worth a read. And God, I feel like even 4 episodes isn't nearly enough to cover a fraction of this man's breadth.
But just like the sort of closing of the loop that Stephen King seems to have been on a journey in this last decade plus of his writing, we wanted to make sure that we closed the loop on our Stephen King deep dive as far as his written works.
We'll definitely be visiting his many, many adaptations, especially the one he did himself, Maximum Overdrive. Got to get into that.
I don't know if he wants us to talk about that.
He did say the other day in one of our weekly lunches together.
You wish.
Could you please not talk about the movie I directed on cocaine? And I was like, no. Now eat your Eggs Benedict because it's Egg Benedict Day.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Happy National Eggs Benedict Day, everybody. Get out them hollandaises.
Holly
days. Ah. Well, I had fun.
Me too. I hope you enjoyed.
Do you think we'll do more deep dives on other authors? Maybe not a 4-parter, but like...
Maybe an author. Yeah, for sure.
I would
loved
love
it.
to. Yeah, maybe a director.
Maybe if you listeners have any ideas on what you would like us to do, who would you like us to deep dive
You can find
on?
us online at Terra in Tandem on Instagram line web.
You can find us at terraintandem.com, but you can contact us at Terra in Tandem on Instagram.
On the Instagram. Just ask your grandkids how to use it.
Oh, boy. Well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you so
Enjoy
much.
reading on this gloomy, gloomy day.
It's been an honor.
And I hope it's gloomy when you listen to this. So
Yeah.
that you can read.
In the glooming.
Bye, everyone.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Sispanik. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're